welcome to my channel where we talk about faith, how to heal and deal with racism, and how to navigate this thing we call life. Let's get started. Today, we will be talking about how to forgive someone who hurt you. And specifically, I will be sharing my testimony of how God led me to forgiveness with specific coworkers who were racist to me. Wow. I just want to say that forgiveness is so hard, okay? Any type of forgiveness is hard. I will say that forgiveness in the face of oppression is probably harder, and forgiveness in the face of racism, a particular aggressive type of oppression, is very difficult, especially because so much of our history has not been acknowledged. So much of our history with racism has not been addressed, and so much of our history of racism has not been healed and repaired. So it really makes it difficult. And unfortunately, that can result in us getting hardened hearts and all of that stuff. Okay, I'm sure that you have probably, as a person of color, experienced the difficulty of what it is to forgive someone who was racist towards you, right? That is difficult. In my first video, when I shared my testimony, I actually shared how I even had a coworker call me a dog in one instance, and how God led me to forgive them. I also shared how in that video, as well as one of my other videos on my promotion, how God led me to forgive some of my primary offenders who withheld a promotion from me at the same time of giving a promotion to 3 white women. Okay, so get this. I understand your pain. I do. Okay, I've gone through the fire. Okay, so when I say that I know it's difficult to forgive people who have been racist towards you, like, I get it. Okay, I get it. Okay, so the fact is that there are some practical ways that I believe can help you and in the process heal you, right, from the hurt and pain that's been caused. So I'm excited to share. So I know in the Bible it talks about forgiveness and the importance to forgive and all of that. And that's really, really great. And it's important. And as Christians, we need to hear that. But sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out how that actually translates into reality. So I have 10 tips and tricks for how I did it, and I want to share that with you. The first one was that I took personal time. All right, listen, if y'all have not already watched my video on self-care, watch it, okay? You need personal time. That is important. When I was in the thick of experiencing the height of racism in that season, oh my gosh, I was at my fuse was so short. I was so annoyed. I did not have grace. I was pissed. There's all these different things, because it's just like, if it's not one thing, it's another. It's coming at me this day, it's coming at me that day. La 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 la. And it sucked, okay? It absolutely sucked. So if I was ever gonna get to a place of actually actively forgiving like Christ has called us to, I just needed to take a chill pill and have my personal time. That meant I was not hanging out with anyone else but me and God and me and God. And that's it, okay? That actually really helped to have me reset. I was able to get poured in by God, and I was able to just kind of insulate myself from all the violence that was taking place at the time. I was able to insulate myself. I was able to kind of heal and kind of hibernate and kind of repair, like, all at once. Like, that was important, because at the stage that I was at, before, had I not taken like extended personal time, I'm talking about like a week or so of just like you, yourself, and God, right? Just that's it, okay? And again, please watch my video on self-care, because I did all of those things that I shared with you. I did all of those things. I made sure to fast. I made sure to pray. I made sure to ask God what he wanted from me. I made sure to take a bath in self-care, right? And love myself and affirm myself. And I allowed myself to feel. I acknowledged my own humanity and the fact that, I wasn't feeling right. I did the real method, which again, if you have not watched the video on self-care, please watch it. I did all those things. So the first thing, before you get to other people, you have to work on yourself. So take personal time. That is the number one thing. And this stuff is in order, okay? This stuff is in order based on what God was leading me to do, okay? Take personal time. Refill your spirit. Get that healing from God. Take your personal time. So after I took my personal time, I sought God intentionally for support in the journey. So that kind of gets to what I was talking about in terms of me praying and fasting. I actually did dedicated Bible studies. I made sure to spend my time with God in the morning, specifically to, how I should be reacting, right? Like how I should be forgiving. I was studying forgiveness. I was trying to, ask God for support and help to heal me from having a hardened heart, from being upset, all of those different things. I was seeking God, and I was a firm believer that God was going to allow me to really receive wisdom from him so that I could be healed, so that I could really kind of figure out like how to navigate this. Because again, the Bible doesn't necessarily share like how to forgive, right? Like that was something I needed to get from God. Like the Bible shares to forgive, right? But then in terms of walking the walk of how to forgive, especially for folks who have experienced racism and how to forgive the people who have been those primary offenders to them, that's not in the Bible. So I really just needed to ask God and discern what God was sharing with me so I could walk through it. So I would definitely suggest, make sure that if you have not already, seek the face of God. Seek the face of God, okay? That is so important. Seek what God has for you because he can speak directly into your situation in a very particular, customized way that only God can. The third thing that I did was to list my primary offenders who I knew by name. And during that time, I asked God to reveal anyone who was missing. So, I realized that it wasn't just like one person, that had been racist towards me. It was a list of people, and I couldn't just be like, oh, I'm gonna forgive them and just kind of have it as a clump. Like they all were racist towards me in different ways, right? And at different levels. And some were like, I don't want to say isolated incidents, but maybe it wasn't as like reoccurring as others, so obviously there was probably more hurt and pain with that. There was also like the weight of their racism was different depending on how much it like hurt me spiritually, hurt my mental health, hurt my pocketbook, all those different things. So it was important to actually name them by name so that I could get to the process of forgiving each one of them based on what they did to me individually, because they did not do the same thing to me. While I named them, then I was like, okay, I feel like I'm being real with myself, but how many folks know that God's the ultimate being that like knows everything, and he is all up in your business, okay? That is a good thing when it comes to needing to forgive, because you don't want to harbor just unnecessary hardened hearts in, so on and so forth, like towards people, because that unfortunately compromises the closeness that we can have with God. So because of that, I wanted God all up in my business, okay? So I was like, okay, like I feel like this list is pretty comprehensive, God, but just to play it on the safe side, can you help a sister out? Can you let me know if I'm missing anyone? And he did. Over the course of like 4 different nights, God added 4 people to that list by name. So he was giving me spiritual dreams, and it was just like, okay, this person you have not forgiven. This is what that person did, and you have not forgiven that person. So I would write that person's name down at my prayer journal underneath the list that I had already had, and I was still praying. And then the next night, then God was like, there's this other person. This is what they did. Like, this is like how you're feeling towards them. You have not forgiven them. So I would write that other person's name down until eventually it was just like, okay, like I felt like, God had not revealed anything else. And like I said, it happened 4 consecutive nights and 1 night per person. So, and it was really helpful because I was essentially kind of starring like their names, because I'm like, well, clearly God wants something out of like this, There is power in being able to name specifically who has offended you and all of that stuff. And asking God, if you missed someone, because there were even instances where like one of the 4, I thought that I had forgiven one of the 4. I really thought I had. And God revealed to me, no, baby girl, like, we need to go through this again. So that was actually really helpful, because had I not been attentive to like even like saying that prayer, then I wouldn't have actually even known that I had not fully forgiven one of the other people. And I think what it was, just to kind of give a little background, was I had forgiven that person, and then that person continued to offend me and to continue to be racist. So it was kind of like on the journey of me forgiving, then it was like an open wound still, and I didn't fully recover. So even though I had thought subconsciously like, oh no, like I've already forgiven that person, whatever, I'm not fazed by this person, all this stuff. The fact is that God actually showed me my heart, and I was. That brings me to my 4th step in this journey. I had to intentionally decide to forgive. So, yes, you heard me right. I had to make the intentional decision to forgive. I think as humans, we think forgiveness is a feeling. It's not. Forgiveness is a decision. You can decide to forgive. You can decide to withhold forgiveness. Forgiveness is a decision. And if it's a decision, then it means that I have to actively partake in that decision, which means that I have to actively make the decision of whether or not I'm going to forgive you, or whether or not I'm not going to forgive you. So in order for this process to work, I needed to make up in my mind that I was set in forgiving. Okay? That is a decision. So again, that was not the first decision that I made. The first decision I made was to make sure that I was taking care of myself. I had that personal time. The second one was around God, right? I needed to hear from God. I needed God's support. I needed God's wisdom. The third one, I actually started writing down the names of all my offenders, and then I invited God in and said, hey, like, let's go ahead and add to that if I might be missing anyone. And then it wasn't until that I was like, okay, no, I'm making the decision to forgive. God wouldn't have given me those dreams if God didn't intend for me to forgive. That was his hope for me. That's the same thing for you. God does not want you to carry around the weight of someone else's sin, okay? So be released from that right now in the name of Jesus. God does not want you to hold on to their sin being in the form of racism, right? Like, that is not your burden to carry. It is not. It is not. It is not. So I had to make the decision to forgive. And then once I made the decision to forgive, I had to accept the fact that I had to continue to make the decision to carry out the process, because forgiveness is a decision in the beginning, but it's a process, right? Until you reach that place of full healing, full forgiveness, so on and so forth. So it's a decision and it's a process. And I had to make the decision every single day to stay faithful to that process. The 5th step, once you decide to forgive, is to write out the names and ask these questions. So as I mentioned, I had already written down the names, okay? But now what I did was actually on another page, I wrote down the name, but then I kind of had it in a chart, and I had questions, right? So in one column, it was what feelings do I harbor against this person, right? And then their name was there, and I had room to essentially like address like, what it was. So in another column, I actually had to ask another question. And that question was essentially, how is this, essentially like what they did to me, how is this impacting my heart's condition? And then I was writing down like how it was impacting my heart's condition. Maybe I had just like a lot of bitterness and even hate towards them. Whatever it was, I wrote that down so that I was aware of how that was impacting me. The third question that I asked was if they were to succeed, or if anything good in their life was to happen and I was to find out, then would I be happy for them or would I be upset? And I actually learned this when I was visiting one of my best friends in London. We went to Hillsong Church and they were preaching on forgiveness one Sunday. And I remember that question. I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a great question. So I had that in my questions that I even asked myself that I want to offer you all. Because the fact is that in the beginning of that process, I was like, ooh, if I see them succeed, if I see any good thing happen to them, I'm gonna be up in arms. Like, I was not happy with them. I was just like, they deserve a lot of bad things that I won't even say right now. Amen. So getting back to it, it was just like, well, if anything was to happen, right? If they were to get a promotion, if they were to buy a house, if they were to be happy just in general, like anything, if anything good was to happen to them, like would I genuinely be happy for their success, or like how would I feel, right? This is a really good indicator, again, of whether or not you have reached forgiveness, because this is a question actually that I'll say I had to ask myself throughout the process. Remember how I said that it's a process? Like I had to ask, I asked it like, a couple weeks in, a couple months in, and so on and so forth. And eventually I got to a place where I was able to fill that question out and be like, oh, actually, like their success has no bearing on any of my feelings. Like, I don't care. And like in a very genuine way, like I am not harboring any bad feelings towards them. And if they were to succeed, great. Like, I'm not gonna be like bitter or like resent them because God bless them, So that's a really good telltale to know that you actually have forgiven them, is basically because it kind of like examines your heart's condition. And then the fourth question that I had to ask myself essentially was, what does God say about them? And that was hard because I know I said a lot of things about them in my head that the Holy Spirit knew. And then it was just like, well, I guess I should start writing affirmations about how God sees them. That was a doozy, y'all. That was a doozy. But I share these questions with you because I went ahead and I would write their name, right? I'd leave space. I'd write another name. I'd leave space, and so on and so forth. And then I'd write the 4 questions, 1, 2, 3, 4. And it would just kind of be a chart just so I would have it in plain sight for me. You can do it however way you want. But those are the 4 questions I asked that I offer to you all because they really help me examine my heart, examine, where I was. Right? Instead of lying to myself, being like, oh yeah, like I'm fine, like I'm over it. It's like, no, like let's answer these questions and actually see if I've fully forgiven them. So that was really, really important. So I just want to go ahead and offer that to you all too. The 6th thing I did was pray for them by name in a genuine way. So the first time that I prayed for someone who just like I had like wronged me, was super rude to me, so on. This was not an instance of racism, but it was many years before. And I remember actually that softened my heart. And I was just like, okay, like I know that I need to actually like pray for these people. So I prayed for them, and it wasn't like a fake prayer, like, God, I hope you bless them because I don't know what's going on with them. It was not like that. It was very, very genuine, and those prayers got stronger as I did them more. Like in the first time, it was really hard for me to muster up like my lips to open up to be like, praying. But once I got started and I got past like the first person, and it was like, okay, like I'm here with me and God, and I'm interceding on their behalf, So it got easier, and as the days went on, I noticed that like my prayers got deeper for them, and I even got to a point where I was like crying on behalf of them and all of that stuff, and just taking things before the Lord, and that really just softened my heart. And during those prayers, I would ask God for God to give me words of wisdom over them, and that really did soften my heart, So in one instance, God gave me wisdom to share with one of my colleagues about her children, and I just sat her down and I just gave her the word of the Lord, and she just started breaking down, and she really needed to hear that. Again, had no idea, no understanding other than God. And with that, I felt so full of the Spirit, and it was just like, I'm not going to allow your sin to get in the way of what God can do. And it really allowed me to like heal, because God was giving me that healing during those times where I was praying in my prayer closet. Okay. Another instance was over a colleague's marriage. And again, it's only by the grace of God. So in that, again, like I had like hardened heart towards that person. And by that time, I was already like praying for them every single day and so on and so forth. And having that conversation allowed me to see more of like that person's humanity. And even though that person ignored mine, like, I mean, come on, like that happened with Jesus, right? Like people ignored, people did not love him, but still he showed them love. And that's hard. And we're not perfect as humans, and we're not perfect. It is what it is. But we can learn from what Jesus did. And the fact of the matter is that God was softening my heart in that prayer room. And as a result of a softened heart, it was easier to continue in the process, to stay committed to the decision that I made in step 3 of forgiving. Okay, so I would just suggest, once you already have gone through these steps, then do the additional step and pray. And the first day may not be the best day, right? You might just be like, okay, Lord, I pray for their health. Okay, if that's all you can do, and remember, it's not supposed to be there, it's supposed to be like, their actual name, and then you go on to the next person, and then you pray over them, again, by name. But maybe the next day, it's like, Lord, I pray that they would have an encounter with you that would shake their foundation of how they know you, how they experience you. I pray, God, that they would just be completely enamored with spending time with you. I pray, God, that they would feel your presence even when they feel lonely, God. I pray, Lord, that you would revolutionize their mind to allow them to understand their error of their ways, God. I pray, Lord, that they would repent. I pray, Lord, like literally like praying for them, right? It will take time, but give yourself grace. It's fine, okay? God sees your heart, but make sure that you're making the good effort, right, to actively pray for them by name. And even when you're doing that, then God will give you specific things for that person and specific things for other people on your list. After that, my next step was to do something out of your heart for them, to serve them. So this was hard. I know for one of my teams, I actually decided to just go ahead and like make holiday treats. And that was really difficult for me, especially because I was feeling like ostracized and, all that stuff as a result of racism. But I made a point to do it. And I was like, I am not going to allow bad company to corrupt good character. And I know that God's called me to love. I know that God's called me to serve. I know that God's called me to forgive. And I am a reflection of Christ. So with that said, if y'all hadn't done all of this stuff, what would I have normally been inclined to do? And for me, I would have normally been inclined to be like, let me make you some holiday treats, right? I did that for my Bible study. I did it like for other people, like in our friend and family group. So let me go ahead and do the same for you. Let me not withhold what I would have otherwise done for you. because you offended me through racism, right? So that's what I challenged myself to do. But keep in mind, this was not immediate. This was after time, right? I had already been like spending time with God. He had been softening my heart, all of that stuff. So I would not suggest to just go straight to this, right? Because that can be very triggering. It can be very harming. You know, like you need to be at a place where you are receiving from God and you are on the verge of like being fully healed. Like that is important, right? And in the process of your healing, right? Then that's when essentially I decided to make that decision of not allowing their character to corrupt mine. So I did like holiday treats for them, did a little card. That was like one time. Another time I asked a coworker to go out for a walk. And this was also not too long after God had given me, like it was a couple of weeks, like that I did before. Because I knew that God had given me the dream about that person and forgiving that person for a reason. So I was like, I literally had pushed myself to be like, hey, you know, I'm really feeling it on my heart for us to reconnect. Would you like to go out on a walk this afternoon? Like that took a lot out of me, and I was walking by faith on that because I'm like, okay, God, like you wouldn't have revealed that to me if it wasn't something that you wanted me to gain from this. So I'm gonna get myself together, I'm gonna ask for your strength, and I'm gonna do this. And it was good. It was just like, okay, like this is a way that I'm positioning myself in a way where it's just like, I'm doing things that I would have otherwise offered, right? I'm in a place of like servant leadership that I would have otherwise been had you not done what you did. So another thing that I did was provide compliments that were genuine, right? So only if I truly felt a certain way, I did it. But the Bible talks about speaking life, right? And that's important. So it's like, okay, what can I say to you that can speak life over you? Where essentially it's like, this is how God views you, right? Like maybe it's a particular attribute that you have. Maybe it's a particular characteristic. Maybe it's the way that your heart is being postured in a particular situation. What can I affirm that you're doing that is in line with the kingdom, right? So I wouldn't necessarily like affirm something that's a sin, of course not. But, you know, if they were showing love in a difficult situation, it's like, wow, I just really want to affirm like the strength that it took to show love in that situation. You know, like that was what I did. Like that was also really good for me because it, again, just kind of gets to like, what would I have done if I was not harboring unforgiveness to you, right? Let me operate in faith and go through the process knowing that God will deliver me from a hardened heart, right? And this is what I would be doing if I didn't otherwise have a hardened heart towards you, you know? And then another thing was I engaged in genuine conversation. You know, something that was really difficult for me at first was to talk to people. People be like, oh, how are you? I'm like, I don't want to talk to you. Like, you were racist to me yesterday. Like, you were racist to me the day before. You were racist to me the day before that. You'll probably be racist to me today. Like, I didn't want to talk to you. But it took every ounce. I know with this particular person, they came by my desk and they started talking. And at first I was like, continue doing my work. Oh, yeah. I'm doing my work. Like, stop, you know? But then I had to remind myself, I'm like, no, girl, that's not how you do it. So I literally stepped away from my desk. I positioned my body in a way where it's like I'm actively engaged with you. And I told myself that I had to take every negative thought about that person and about how I didn't want to be in this conversation captive, make it obey the Lord. And I needed to make sure that I was being a representative of Christ in that situation. And I was like genuinely being open to the possibility of God potentially using that person who had been racist towards me, transforming that person from a Saul into a Paul, right? So I was open and I was genuinely engaged. And again, this is something that took prayer and time. So I would definitely not say to try to force it, in the beginning. Like, don't do that, because that's going to probably result in like you getting harmed more and all that stuff. This was at a point where my heart was already softened. God had already worked on me and was continuing to work on me, giving me words of wisdom for myself and for my offenders, all that stuff, and was healing me. Okay, so just take that and operate in wisdom, okay, with this particular thing. The 8th step is to remind yourself that forgiveness is not for the other person. Forgiveness is for you. So with forgiveness, I think so many times we withhold it, just in general, because it's like, oh, well, they don't deserve it. And Joyce Myers, I was looking at Joyce Myers, Heather, Lindsay, Hillsong, just a lot of other folks. And during that season, and even before that, I really had to accept the fact that forgiveness is not for them. Forgiveness is for me. It's me with the hardened heart. I'm the one who is being stressed out. I'm the one who's angry. I'm the one who has bitterness. I'm the one whose mood is impacted, right? I'm the one who, as a result of this is actually distancing my ability to actually walk with God closely and intimately, right? Like, forgiveness is impacting my mental health, my spiritual health, my physical health. Like, it's not worth it. Your sin is not worth bringing me down. It's just not. So as hard as it is, let me socialize myself differently into thinking moving from a place of, you have to earn my forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that is deserved, to I'm going to forgive you because I don't have time to waste on you. I don't have feelings and anger to waste on you. I don't want your sin to come in the way of my closeness with God. It's for me, okay? It's for me. So the sooner that we can accept that, right? And I had to accept it, and I had to remind myself, like, especially when there were like other offenses, like during this process, it was just like, oh, forgiveness is for me. Forgiveness is for me. Forgiveness is for me. Not to mention the fact that God tells us that we need to forgive other people if we're expecting for him to forgive us, you know? And of course there's grace, and God understands what a difficult experience racism is. Like, I mean, he has grace for us, okay? Nonetheless, I was adamant about not allowing them to impact my spiritual journey, okay? The other thing I had to remind myself in that, though, was that me forgiving them does not excuse their behavior. They are going to be held accountable by God, okay? And that actually provided a little comfort for me, I'm not gonna lie. It made it easier to be like, okay, like, they're gonna be held accountable by Jesus, but guess what? So will you. So just as I mentioned earlier, Jesus is expecting you to forgive them, just as Jesus forgave you. So if they're going to be held accountable to the racism that they gave you, you're also going to be accountable to any hardened heart that you have towards them. So I want to get rid of that all right now, right? I want to get rid of that all right now, because I don't want it to impact me, and I know I'm going to be held accountable to my actions, and I want God to be like, oh yeah, girl, like, you got it right when you were trying to do all this stuff to correct your heart and involve me in the process and get support from me and all this other stuff. Like, I want God to be like, well done, my daughter. The 9th step was to relinquish revenge. With this, it really took a lot of faith. I had to have the faith that God would have the final say, period. And it kind of gets to the other point that I made, where it's like God is going to hold us according to our, it's going to hold us accountable. And that means that God is going to hold them accountable for their actions. And it's like, no, like, God has the final say. And God will take care of them in the way that God deems fit. And I had to have faith, and that was an exercise of faith, okay? And me relinquishing the control of wanting to get revenge, of wanting to put them back in, like a bad situation or anything like that. Like, I had to relinquish that. That was a spirit of control also, where it's just like, no, I had to like surrender to like let God like really like work on me with that. And I had to remind myself, like, Marley, do you have faith in God? Do you believe that God is all powerful, almighty? If that's the case, then God can take care of this situation and God can take care of them. The reason why I feel like I might need to control the situation is because it's showing a lack of faith that God will actually adequately control the situation and address the situation the way that it should be. So I had to remind myself, it's like, no, I walk by faith. I don't walk by sight. Even though I don't necessarily realize like how they're being dealt with right now, I walk by faith. I don't walk by sight. I know what my God says. I know that God will take care of me. I know that God has the final say. I know that God addresses my enemies, the people who have done wrong to me. I know that God is providing me security and provision and taking care of the people who have offended me. I know that. I have faith in that. So I had to really have faith in it. And in that allowed me to fully surrender to any revenge or anything that I may have had. And that was really, really helpful because, again, it allowed me to continue the process in forgiveness and in love. That brings me to my 10th and final step, which is to continue to be real with myself, to be consistent and pray through it all, and remind myself of steps 1 through 9. So this is a process. Like I mentioned in the beginning, you can make the decision, but guess what? It's a process and you have to be committed to the process. So I had to remind myself of some of those steps, right? I had to remind myself to be consistent, to continue to pray, to not let up, to pray consistently, right? I had to remind myself to do that. And in addition to reminding myself, I had to be real with myself. I couldn't just be like, oh, everything is just rainbows. Like, no, my heart is hardened towards this person. I've forgiven this person. All right, like, that's great. But my heart is still hardened towards this other person, right? I had to be real with myself. If I'm not going to be real with myself, I don't know who will be, right? So be real with yourself. You're doing yourself a disservice if you're lying and just pretending like you've forgiven someone when actually you have a hardened heart towards that person. And I also just want to say that some days in the process were easier than others. And I want to say that when I was actually writing the outline for this video, God, when I wrote those words, God gave me, but don't get dismayed. Okay? So when I looked that up, I saw actually two scriptures that I want to share with you. Isaiah 41:10 and Joshua 1:9. So in Isaiah 41:10, it says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you." And then we have Joshua 1:9. "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." So I just want to encourage you that literally while I was doing this video, God gave me those words. God gave me those words. Do not be dismayed. And I believe the reason that God gave me those words was because he knew that you were going to watch this video. He knows that dealing with racism is hard. He knows that making the decision to forgive your enemies is hard. But he wants to tell you that he's not leaving you or forsaking you. He wants to tell you that he is your strength. In Isaiah, it says, "I will help you. I will uphold you." These are promises from God. These are promises from God. So I just want to encourage you, do these steps. Walk in faith, knowing that God will uphold you. God will strengthen you. God will help you. Do not be dismayed. This is a process. It's not an easy process. Some days are easier than others. You have to be committed to it. But God has given you the promise that he will not leave you. He will not forsake you. He will strengthen you. He will help you. He will uphold you, okay? And in addition, again, in Joshua, we see that we don't have to be frightened. We don't. We don't have to be frightened. Let us not be dismayed, because God's given us another promise. He will go with us wherever we go. So that means that as we're practicing these steps, God is with us. That means when we're in that prayer closet praying for our enemies by name, God is with us. That means that when we are trying to step out on faith and actually be in a place of authentically engaging and loving on them, God is with us. God is with us in the difficulty. God is with us in the pain. God is with us in the process of forgiving our enemies. So I hope that this encourages you. Again, know that God had these specific words for you, okay? God gave them to me for you. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, comment below. Tell me, how this content is engaging with you, and any prayers that you might have as you're on this process of really going deeper and forgiving people who have been racist towards you. I'm praying for you. Know that God is with you. Until next time.